A lot of people are hurting bad, Indian people, for what they've experienced. A lot of it's coming out now. And some of them stories are similar. But I find out when I talk to a lot of people, a lot of these stories are unique because we're all individuals and we all experienced things differently, perhaps, or we have a different perspective. But one thing we have in common is that we were stolen, we were mistreated.
Tanshe, essay the shini kashun, ne nehio, pimichif, treaty 6 dushin, clackamus, calipuya, pe chinook, latarni weekend, monfemi, shini kashu, Lawrence Anderson, pe gardapi. Hello, everyone. My name is Essay. I am the Kagichi Ivy Win project director at Seeding Sovereignty, and I am really excited to have the opportunity that I do today of speaking with two individuals to shed light on storytelling and the way that we interact with our truths as Indigenous, as Native people. Kakichi Highwaywind was established to be a place for people to find their voice in the aftermath of forced assimilation efforts that transpired since the onset of colonization in the countries we know as Canada and the United States, although as Indigenous people, we know them by their true names that they have held since time immemorial. That being said, I'm really looking forward to this storytelling session with my guests to really be able to elaborate on what it feels like to an individual and how that can help heal an entire mass of people by honesty and truth-telling. My guests are very special. Their names are Agnes Woodward and Lester Howse. I would like for Agnes to go ahead and introduce herself. I know that we'll be carrying on these dialogues for a while. This is going to be an extended series. I hope that you listening continue to tune in and hear these stories, not as a form of baiting with trauma, but as a form of healing for generations to come. So with that, Agnes, if you would like to introduce yourself.
From Kwakatu's First Nations. I was born and raised majority in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I currently live in Newtown, North Dakota on the Fort Berthold Reservation, which is home to the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara people. My husband and children are enrolled citizens here, and they are Arikara. I'm really grateful for this opportunity for my father, Lester, to speak about his experiences. I do believe that as Indigenous people, our lived experiences matter, and sharing our journeys and all the things that we've endured and come to understand, sharing the healing, that's a really valuable source of knowledge. And I'm glad that my father has this opportunity to talk about his experiences. I know that he has a lot to offer, our people, Indigenous people, but also non-Indigenous people, especially as a way to further awareness about a lot of issues and, assimilation policies. And sharing our lived experiences is a good way to really foster solidarity through compassion, understanding, and empathy. And with that, Dad, I'd like you to take the time to introduce yourself and, share whatever comes to your mind and to your heart.
Oh, thank you, my girl. I'll start with the language, who I really am in relation to a name. Wapiskachit Pirshu, Nesigashu, Masko Netoten. Sagashino, Asnevachi Ekteus, Ektenewiri in Kaas. Anot, Ote Pixka. Tansimaga, Moniawak, Ikamuticek, Mechet, Tok, Awasak. Nista Mina. Oh, Niimsas, Niistes, Kahkiau, ja kohtumin. Mina metseettavak, nii hea euksiisaga, avasak, metseettavak, ei kamuuteetek, moniaag. Euksä. My name is White Thunderbird. Some say that's your Indian name, some say it's your spiritual name. No, that is my name, my first name. The corporate name, if you will, is Lester Howse. My father was a mixed blood, or some would say half-breed. He could never relate to being anything else other than an Indian. He spoke the language well, very well. My mother was Indian. She also spoke the language well. That's what we grew up with, both English, not very good English, but both our language and a little bit of English is what we grew up with. I was born January the 7th, 1944, and what is known today as Rimbey, Alberta, a small town which has grown somewhat. And at the time I was born, I find out later from my older brother and my older cousins how things were at that time. My oldest brother, late brother, Martin, he told me, as well as my cousin Steve, who's a lot older, late Steve, that at the time that my mother was pregnant with me, I don't understand it all, but I guess I gave her a hard time when I was born. She went dry, or whatever that means, and I refused to exit. I refused to be born out there in the bush. So those two, my cousin and my brother, they were told to ride to the nearest phone and call the RCMP, in particular Sergeant Lester. Apparently he was a good man and a lot of the people liked him. So what they told me was the day there should have been at least 5 feet of snow or more in that area in that time, January, the middle of winter. There was no snow. There was absolutely no snow. And they told me, both of them mentioned, when they got on the horses, it was so warm. In the middle of the winter, they had to remove their coats. It was so warm. They just rode with shirts on. So what happened was, when Sergeant Leslie arrived, apparently my mom was taken in back seat, and the hospital isn't there today. As I was showing you, like, there used to be an old wooden hospital, real old style place. And I was born, some say I was born in his car. Somehow I came out. Others say they had to carry my mom in and I was born on the way in. Whatever, I was born at that particular time, in that particular situation. And it is quite humorous because I remember my brother laughing about it. He's saying, we weren't sure where you were born, whether it's in a police car or not. He said, maybe you were born in a police car to get used to it. I found that quite funny. But that's how he was. He's always humorous about matters. But after some period of time, I guess you might say, when you come into your memory, I recall as a little child quite a few things that I never could understand. But later on in years, it was either explained to me or I found out myself. what really happened at the time. I'll mention some of those matters. Now, moving on to growing up, I recall, for example, a lot of people today would probably be surprised, shocked at it. But I recall one time we were very small, and when my aunties, my mom, and all the others, my older cousins, the men, they used to work for white farmers. Periodically, they'd have to leave. We'd have to go from there. And I remember we used to live in a tent. We'd stay in the tents, and sometimes a stove in there, sometimes just a fire outside. That's how we'd live. And I honestly don't recall ever seeing any of the white people on those farms. But what I do remember is when we had lunch, if you will, we had a big midday meal. We would always eat outside, kids in one area on one blanket, the older people on another. And I recall seeing the babies. It may have been my younger sister, I don't recall, but just babies. I believe it was two of them. And I remember mentioning this to one of my older cousins, and she's a lot older than me. She was around at that time, and she said her mother was my auntie, my mom's sister, the youngest one. She said she always had the most milk. She had the biggest breasts, so a lot of times the babies were passed to her. Doesn't matter who's the mother; they were all mothers. And those who had the most milk, they would pass them to her. But I remember the babies being passed around periodically when they took a break. And a lot of times it was never the mother, it was one of the aunties. So when I think of my mom and her sisters, my aunties, there was three of them. I had four moms. Probably one time I was fed the same. But I thought of that, and it's a nice feeling to laugh about it, because a lot of people today would find that rather perhaps intrusive or whatever. But it's so natural when I think of it now. And even then, it was like, well, that's what you do. So that was one of my memories. I recall the camps that we had. There was always tents. Periodically, we'd see a teepee. And I remember the camps that we had, they were in the not immediate area. I know we would travel sometimes overnight by wagon box. There was no cars for us in them days. It was all wagons and horse-drawn. And in the camps, for example, when we're berry picking, we were just left to run around. Periodically, they'd yell at us if we got too far away, tell us to come back. And most of us would eat berries. We wouldn't pick. Well, we'd pick, but we'd put them in our mouth. That time our mouth would just beat red. And we'd have a little pail. But when we'd go in, we'd put all the berries that everybody had, all the kids had, in one pail, so it looked like we worked together. we were doing something. But I remember one day, it was so wonderful. We were picking, us kids, and one of them, I believe it was my cousin Johnny, said, "Look up, there's a bear over there." So we did. We all looked, and the bear turned and looked at us. And nobody was scared, so we just went back to picking. The bear went back to eating. And it's almost like we're parallel with that bear. When we're picking, we'd move a little head. The bear would move a little ahead. We'd look at the bear, he'd look at us. No problem. Nobody was scared. We didn't have to run. But that's one of the things that I thought about most, a lot of times in my life. There was no fear. There was no fear of the natural world, because we didn't even have to talk about it. Because I know when one of the older people came, I forget who it was. I think it was my cousin Richard. We just mentioned, oh, there's a bear over there. He just looked and acknowledged it and just let it be. He didn't grab a gun or anything like that. Because at that time we were told, later on when I reached the age of reason, we're never to kill bears. That's not the time to kill bears anymore. But anyway, moving on from there, I recall at one time we were running the removing camp, and it had rained, and the trails we use, usually the wheels of the wagon, they make a mark and it stays almost permanent. As a matter of fact, years ago I went back and looked at some of the old trails and they're still there. Talk about memories coming back then. But at this particular time I'm speaking of, see, all of us kids, we used to run beside the wagon. We try to keep up with the horses, and they would never run the horses. They just walk fast. But we were running, and it was slippery because it had rained. And I got a little ahead. I got ahead of the horses. And I wasn't really looking. I was just watching. I was watching the kids beside me trying to pass me. And I slipped. And the horses were right there, and not one of those horses stepped on me. They stepped over me. But the wagon ran over my legs. And I recall I was going to scream. It hurt so bad. And I was just going to scream. But I was grabbed by the back, the shirt. In them days, we used to have these coveralls where you could grab right here and you'd have a good portion of that pants, that coverall. And I remember I just thrown in the wagon. It's amazing because I remember I sniveled a little bit, and I woke up. When I woke up, I can't recall whether it was Mom or Coco who had me. It was soothing me, was rubbing my legs. She had something, I don't know what, medicine of some sort. She was rubbing my legs, and she was kind of humming, singing something. And that was it. I went to sleep. Now in the morning, I could hear the kids all up, they're having fun. And I feel my legs are a little bit hurting. I was still laying in the wagon. They let me sleep in there that night. And I felt I was all right, a little bit sore. Then I jumped down, hurt a little bit. But as soon as the kids started running around, I got right in there with them. So it didn't last long, that pain. So whatever Mama or Kokum had done to fix me, it worked. Because I know I never known Kokum, my grandmother, I've never seen her, I'm sorry, I've never seen her work with medicine, meaning, mixing and everything like that. But I learned later about her. She was probably one of the last good Indian doctors. And a lot of the people from the reserve used to come and see her. And she just did things quietly. Because of course then it was against the law, to fix people properly. But where I learned so much later on in my life about the older people, but I'm going to speak now on my experiences with them. Another experience I had, the old people, Mashom Kokum, Mashompan, Noagompan, late old people, they had cows, not many, because I remember they used to sell the calves. And the cows that they kept were for milk. And there was one particular animal, it looked like a longhorn that I recall. And that was Kokum's cow and nobody else. She could call that cow, and that cow was big and real rough looking. and she would call, and that cow would follow her. And I remember one day she called me to go in the barn with her. So I went in there, and the old man was there, Mashompa, and he was teasing her cow. And she told him, she told him, Awasota, she said, go away from here. She said, that cow is going to hurt you. It's going to beat you up. So he grabbed the cow by the horns, trying to hold her back, and she turned on him and just threw him almost like across the barn. And we went over to him, and he was just laughing. But I know he was hurt. But he got up and he walked away. He went to the house. We walked with him. We know he was limping. We followed him. We just waited outside. And he came out, and he had some candies. We knew they were candies. We used to call it muskie. We used to call it medicine. So he gave us candies, the three of us. And then he took some himself. And he said, meo muskie. He said, good medicine. And I think he was trying to hide the fact he was hurt. He was showing off. But one of the things I recall, another one, as children, especially us boys, we had a grandfather. He was the oldest brother. At that time, there was three of the old men, three grandfathers that lived with us, or lived next to us in that area in the bush. And the old man, we called him Palso. Or also we call him Kashane, old man. But Palso was his name. And he used to visit my mushroom, one of the twins, and Coco, and we'd watch him when he'd go home. So we'd get ready as kids. The old man was big round old man, and he had a cane. And he knew it was like a little game. So we'd run fast, and he had a very thick belt. So we'd try to grab that belt and duck without him hitting us. But he'd swing the cane. He wouldn't be hard about it. But he knew we were coming running behind him because he was so big he could hardly turn around. So it was me and my late brother Bob, in East Station, my older brother Bob. So we were running. And the old man was walking. And I ducked really low, and I know I had his belt. And I shook it, and I just left. At the same time that I made it, I could hear a thunk. My brother had slipped, and the old man caught him with the cane right before he knocked him down. So right away he got up, and the old man said, "Come with me." So we went with him, and he went in his house, and he came out same as our Muslim did. He was also our grandfather, and he had the same thing. He had candies. He gave some to us, and my brother got extra because of a little knock on the head. He told us the same thing. He said, mio maskio. This is good medicine. And it was. We left him alone after. But I recall that it was so much fun. And he would laugh. He had kind of some would say, a whiskey voice when he'd laugh. You could hardly hear him, but it was so funny. But also, in traveling around by wagon, I also recall one time that we were crossing a place, I forget the name of it, but it was by ferry, and the horses, they had to be held. It was so rough. The horses used to rear up. And I remember the older guys, my older brothers and cousins, they'd have to hang on to those horses tight so they won't rear up because they could easily fall off that ferry because the sides weren't built very high. because we used to hang on the sides of that ferry, and it could only take about four wagons at a time. That was, I forget the name of that place. We used to go and gather there. Indians would gather there. Lake St. Anne. Lake St. Anne. A lot of the people still go there, but most of the old people that I know, they went there just to visit, because a lot of the relatives from north would come once a year, and that's all it was to them, was a place to visit and talk. Who passed away, who's around, who, that kind of thing. We used to listen to them, but it was never really a religious thing for them, although it was sponsored by the church. And I remember going there later on in my lifetime and actually serving the mass. I was an altar boy later on. But anyway, I recall that place. We had a lot of fun there because there was kids from all over the place, and there were so many, and everybody got along pretty well. I remember looking forward to that once a year, to go there, just to see all those kids and, run free and jump in the lake, whatever we wanted to do. But so we'd journey back, and we'd have to make that same ferry trip back. But that's what I recall when I got older. The places we went with Wagon, horses, there was no other mode of transport at that time. And I remember as a kid, we used to watch the older guys. They'd have to build a road out of logs in the springtime because the water was so high. And there was only the roads that were built, they were built for a reason. And in that area, that's the only place, sensible to build a road. So when it flooded, they'd have to build it. And I remember the horses, sometimes they didn't want to go on those logs. So they'd rear up. So remember, they'd have to lead them. But I remember seeing a woman, a small woman. I didn't know who she was. She came in, and she had horses. And she was somewhat of a relative, or they knew her, the old people knew her, because right away they put her in her house, or in their house. And my mom went over there. We were never allowed to go in unless we were invited. They were allowed to come and sit down. But we got the story later. This woman, she had, I believe it was 5 children and a husband, and they were in the bush, like everybody else. You go hunting and trapping, and also we cut a lot of poles. They take them to the market. Well, actually, it was the town, and then a lot of people would come in. Farmers, they'd come to that site in the town. They'd buy so many poles that were cut. But that's what they're doing in the winter. But something happened. There was, I don't know whether, I don't think it was smallpox, but there was some kind of virus that hit them. And she had loaded all of them onto the horses. I remember she had 8 horses. And she put them all on there, and she was bringing them in. They were frozen. And it got too hard, so she stashed them. My older brother was telling us later who that woman was and what had transpired. So she stashed the children and her husband in the snow, and she made it all the way to the old people's place with the horses. So I remember the older guys were putting the horses in the barn, giving them hay. We were just hanging around trying to find out what's going on. But that's what the story was. And she went back, this little woman went back in the spring. And she was offered help to go and dig up her family, to bring them in. She wanted to bury them there where we were. So she refused help. So she went back and she did it. I don't remember seeing when they were brought in. I believe they kept us away. But there is a place out there. It's unmarked. There are no graves, markers, or anything. Usually just stones on top. But that's where they were buried. So that was the official burial for some of the people. And when I think of it, where we lived, we were secure. We were so secure. And the place, when I think of it now, and the way I thought of it way back then, it's very much the same. I thought that was the whole world. There was such beauty in the land. And I recall, it's almost like what people talk about today. That's how we were. We were part of the land. We're part of the earth. Everything that we touched was clean. I recall we used to line up when Muslim was going to water the horses. So he'd put us, sometimes 2 or 3 of us. They were big workhorses. And he'd take us down to the creek with him. We'd be hanging on to each other and the horse. 2 horses. I remember we get to the creek. The water was so pure and good. We'd slide right off the horses when they put their heads down to drink. We'd just purposely slide off, just like you see in the parks today, these slides. So we go down the neck, we go right into the water. We'd swim around, and we'd also drink the water. It was so clean. But, that was really something. And they also had a stone boat. They'd go for water. They had big barrels, I think 4 barrels to fit in the stone boat. There was no wheels on it. And the horses would pull it up the hill, and we'd all run beside it. And when we get up on top, right away we know what's going on. We're going to have a bath that night. We had the fire going outside, and Mom was already, she had a tub, those round tubs, galvanized steel they were made of, round tubs. GSW, I even recall the brand. I used to get them in general stores. That was our bathtub. So there was me and one of my cousins, I forget who. We'd always bath together because we were about the same size, small guys. So we'd be able to sit down in that tub, splash around, and it would be outside. And I remember when the girls would come around, right away we'd jump down in the tub and hide. Like we didn't want to be exposed. But it was really funny. They used to tease us. We'd hang around. We'd have to stay in that tub till Mom come and got us out of there. But it was so wonderful. I think of it, and I've actually done that since when I was in the bush. I got a little tub and got warmed up the water out of the creek, and I washed that with. But those are wonderful memories. But the beauty of that area, I thought of it as the world. This was the world. There was nothing else. And you think of it, I was born during the time of a war. The war ended a year later. I never knew nothing of war. I never knew of anything about it at all. We never even heard. Periodically, you'd get things on the radio, but I personally never heard anything about a war because I was just a baby then. But growing up through that time period, there was no talk of war. I never knew anything about war. There was a Second World War, even a first. Even though old Magnus, my late father, your grandfather, Aggie, he was in the First World War. It was pretty interesting when years later he told me about it. And I don't remember, other than seeing him perhaps once in my life when he went out west, out here. But I remember my brother saying later on, he said, he never talked about being in war other than he went there because of the horses. He joined the army because they used horses in the First World War. Years later, when I talked with him, we sat down, got to know him. I asked him about it. I asked him why he went. And he said it. He said, you know, son, there's a lot of horses dead in the battlefield. He said, I went over there to take care of horses. That's all I do. He had the ability to talk to horses. That's how we lived. As I don't recall too much, but by the time I was a baby, his reputation preceded him, as they say. A lot of the white ranchers heard about him, so they'd find him, and a lot of times they'd give him a house. That's where we'd stay. And my mom would end up being a cook for some of these big ranches, and he had the ability to talk with horses. I heard some of what he says, you know, after I got to know him and saw how he worked with horses. But it was pretty interesting. I remember one time we were near the reserve. I remember I must have been at least 4 or 5 years old. And later on, I used to wonder about this particular time that Mama would be gone. She'd be gone for about 2 or 3 hours. And I find out later what it was all about, why she was gone at that time. Here, she was a cook at one of the ranches near the reserve. And whatever was left over, she'd save it. And my older brother was saying she'd put it in little sacks. She'd keep some for us. But a lot of the stuff she would take extra food, and he went with her. My older brother went with her, and she'd walk close to the reserve. And she'd put those down, and an old woman come in a buckboard. An old Kokum would come. And my mom would give her those bags of food. And my brother was telling me, Mom was crying one time when that old lady came, that old Kokum. Mom was crying. She told her, she said, I only have enough food left for my children, and my husband has to leave now. His job is finished. She says, this is all I can give you. I won't be coming anymore. And he said she went there about 10 different times because it was hard times also on the reserve. People were hungry, they were starving. In Indian Affairs, there was no help. So that's how I remember the good things about my mom. I never knew about personally, but I was alive at that time and never knew these things. But there were so many wondrous things about her. I remember hunting with her. I remember her killing a deer, skinning it by herself, taking the guts out by herself, throwing it over her shoulders, taking the gun, and telling me and my brother Bob to hurry up. We were dragging the rabbits. We should have rabbits. When I think back on it, she was a tough, really physically tough, strong woman, and also mentally. And I recall when I was a kid, she used to grab me once in a while. One of us, whatever kid was near, periodically she'd just turn on the radio. Of course, we'd hear fiddle music, and she'd be dancing around, swinging us around with her, her joyous moments. But it was fun. But also, I recall, a couple times. The first time that we went to school, she pulled us out of there after the first day. We got piled on. They threw rocks at us. That's when we first went to the white man's town. Mom thought because we're light skinned we'll fit in. Not. So there's only one tall white guy that stood with us and helped us. He was a big guy. He drove those others off. They were stoning us. So we grabbed lucky to get a cardboard over all of us, 3 of us, me, Bob, and Dorothy, to get ourselves safely out of that schoolyard. But I remember that white man, Elvin Zach. Wherever you are, Elvin, you're a good man. But he befriended us, and Mom took to him right away, really liked him. But I recall in that town, I remember one time we couldn't eat the food. When we're at the old people's place, I never heard of cornflakes or that kind of stuff. We weren't used to that kind of food. And we'd get it, and we were always hungry. We always wanted to eat. And I remember Mom got mad, and the RCMP came there once a week. They had a little office, and there was another guy in a suit with them. No, I'm sorry, it was a woman was with them. And she went up and blasted him. She stood right up to him and blasted him. I don't recall all that she said, other than I recall her saying, "My kids will not go hungry, and they will not wear any more of these secondhand clothes that you send us." Well, about a week later, here we had store-bought clothes. We had food, decent food. Also, my Muslim used to come in about 15 miles by wagon to bring in some of the food from the garden. Also, once in a while, they'd get a moose. Some of the older cousins would get a moose, and we'd get a good piece of it. That's how we lived in the town. But I recall also she sent us to church. I recall the first priest. I mean, that's how many years ago? About 70 some years ago, was Father Hickey. You know, Hickey? Father Hickey. So he was there to preach to us. So after the service, we'd sit there, and he'd give us a nickel and a glass of milk and a cookie. That's why we went. But Mom sent us, because she would save the nickels, because the nickel was worth something then, way back. So she'd save the nickels. Then one Sunday she said, "You go up here next to Mr. Guy." He was a friend of hers. He was good to us too, that old man. He liked us. So right next to him was a church. So you go to that church. But we didn't know why. We went to the church on Sunday. And the preacher, after he finished, he gave us a sandwich, soup. His wife was really actually sometimes overbearing. She just make sure you're fed. You have enough. You want to make us little bags to take home of food. And we'd get a dime. We get 10 cents, not 5. So I knew what Mom was up to. I remember when she saved all that money, she'd go to the store and we'd have something worthwhile. She was pretty good and shopping for what there was. But that was our life in that white man's town. That was our introduction. It was pretty strange, but we had no friends. Oh, I'm sorry. We befriended one family. One of the girls from school. She couldn't speak good. She had a speech impediment, and I really liked her. It was Sheila Becker. So wherever you are, Sheila, how are you? If you're still around. She was the first one. Her and I become friends, and then we were invited as kids, we were invited to their place. The only place in that town we could go where white people would welcome us. Other than that, they didn't even want us in their store or whatever. But another one I recall, first time I tasted Coca-Cola. It was 5 cents. And it was those small, thick bottles. They were more bottled than there were Coke. But used to cost you just a nickel. So remember, we used to help this guy. We were just more in the way, I think. But he'd give us a nickel each. The guy was at the machine shop. It was a machine shop. So we head to the store. We get a couple of Cokes. And we were able to slide into in the town, they had a ice house. And there was no windows, of course, because they take ice from the lake or the rivers in the winter. big blocks of it, and they'd put sawdust in it in this building. So then they'd come and chop the ice for the ice boxes. That's what refrigerators used that time, was ice, keep them cool. Not that we had one, but we used to be able to slide in there, and it was cool in there when it was hot outside in the summer. And as soon as we got that Coke open, we'd each have a drink. We'd take turns slowly. But there's something about it. I recall when we drank that Coke, we'd get such a rush, just such a rush. Later on in years, one of my sons, when I told him the story, he said, "Dad, what year was that?" I said, "That'd probably be about 49, 50. He said, "Dad, you were actually drinking cocaine-laced Coca-Cola." I said, "How do you know?" He said, "I got an article. Want to read it?" He said, "They were putting coca in Coca-Cola." He says, "Where do you think they get coca besides cola?" They were putting cocaine in the Coke. It was up until, I think, early 50s when they banned it. So we're in a little ice house getting buzzed on coca and didn't know it.
Probably a sugar rush too. All the sugar
Oh,
that.
the sugar on top of it. Woo. Like we couldn't get enough Coca-Cola. But I remember also when we did that, we have to watch, because we have to watch little sister Yvonne would want to get cut in. I'd always have to shoo her away. I'd always leave it to me. I felt like a big meanie at times with her. But she just texted me today, see if I'm but oh, there's so many wonderful things. And we had a place to swim in that town. It was across the tracks way in the bush. Nobody would go there other than us. And we'd take turns. When the girls would go, we'd stay away. When we'd go, the girls were supposed to stay away. So one time Yvonne came, and she was just a little girl. And they left it to me again. So I tried to tell her, "No, you got to go home. You can't come with us, because we're going skinny dipping." So I had to take little stones. I didn't hit her, just thought about it. "Go away, go back home." It's really sad. She was crying, and then she turned around and left. Strangest thing, when we got back, we ran back. Somebody yelled that something happened to her. I guess on the way home, I don't know how it happened or where it came from, but there was a knife that was open. One of those folding knives, it was open, and she slipped, and it cut her. It was pretty bad, pretty deep. But Mom took care of it. But I recall for the longest time she was limping. Just a little girl, she had a limp. And I felt really responsible, for chasing her away. But just give you an idea of the feelings you have as a kid. I just felt guilty, I guess. Like I should never have done that. I shouldn't have chased her away. But it's funny how you feel that way. And even now, when I think of it, I laugh about it. She would too. But it was serious for its time. But anyway, moving on. At that time, it was getting hard for us in that town. We weren't getting along with some of the kids. The nurse was at the door every day checking on us, and they were sent by the government, and Mom would argue with her and tell her to get lost. And she's getting tired of it. She'd talk about it. But I remember in that house in Winfield, Alberta. It's not there anymore. I've been there and looked. But it was a big old house. Some say it was haunted, whatever. It was big enough for us. But we had a room right next to Mom, us boys, me, Don, and Bob. And there was an open door. Mom was on the other side, the wall. And we'd make noise at night. She'd tell us go to sleep, so we'd be quiet for a while. Then we'd hear her talking, and that's when she'd play the radio. We tried to sneak up and listen. So we'd make noise. We're laughing and joking. And we always keep the blanket handy. like this when we're playing around laughing. Sure enough, a tobacco can would come flying. We had the blanket up, so it would hit the top of the blanket and roll off, and we'd laugh. You mess, Mom. Another can would come. So instead of getting up, she just throw the tobacco can. It's time to go to sleep. But it wasn't mean because we heard her laugh. She'd laugh about it. It was kind of like a little game we play nighttime. But I found that funny.
Yeah,
But
all these memories of your mom sound like everything that she did, whether you were living on the land or living in town, stemmed from a place of just pure love for her children,
yeah,
and everything that she taught you guys, even with the hunting and all of that. With her, putting that deer over her shoulders and walking, like that's one of my most favorite stories about her. And I know I have a photo of her, and I don't have any memories, of getting to know her and meeting her. I wish I did, but that's one of my favorite memories to hear about her, because I just picture her being not just like physically strong, but just as a woman, really a real matriarch, and
yeah,
um, just a good mom to you guys. And I just really cherish, those memories, and makes me more proud that I carry her name as well, that I was named
yeah,
after her.
yeah. Yeah, I named you. But
Yeah.
when I think of her, she never said, "Oh, I love you, my boy, I love you." There was never talk of that. And I realized later, just like the old people, it was a living philosophy. They didn't say that. They just lived it. Because, when I think of it now, I mean, that's the greatest love that I ever have in my life. And I know the other family feels the same. They never expressed it verbally, but they sure lived it. Because everything that we did with them, it was almost like preparing us for life. I mean, what greater love can you have for your children? Get them ready for what's coming.
Lester, if I may, it seems like you were never punished for being children, like you were just
No,
treated like people, and you were held.
yes,
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
we were. And that's truly how it was. As a matter of fact, when I think of it, there was never any baby talk type thing, where there was just, they'd speak the language, both a little bit of English and also our language. And it was never like baby talk, some people are baby talk. No, they were never like that. So we're treated somewhat like grown-ups. But they also, I often thought of the old people. They were like children too. They liked to play with us, eh? Different little things. They'd say things that make us laugh, and they'd laugh. They just knew how to get to us emotionally, I guess. And I know a couple of times when I was hurt, I was at the old people's place, and my coco, she's the one. She knew I was holding it back. I think I got kicked that time. A horse caught me in the leg, and I went running to Mom's place. I was just almost crawling, and I didn't want to look at my leg. I could still use it, but barely. And I thought, oh, maybe broke my leg or whatever, thinking like that. So I was running to Mom's, and she wasn't in. So I looked over, and right away, Coco come over, and she started talking to me again. Whatever she had within her, I forgot about the pain. Next thing, I'm the only one sitting in her house, her log house, and I'm having oh, I was having a bowl of blueberries and whipped cream, fresh whipped cream. She used to have milk, and then she'd save the cream. And she had in the middle of her house there was a hole in the floor, and there was a door you'd lift up. Well, that was her fridge, and she'd had a box, and she'd pull it up. So that's where she had her whipped cream and all that, keep it cool, way down in the middle of her floor in the house, hole in the floor. But I felt so good. I sat there and I had blueberries with fresh cream. Oh, that was so wonderful. But in some ways, I knew I was her favorite because I remember her telling me one time. She said, "Que papa, Kinox, son." Says you look like your dad. And she said, uh, "Oh, Miona Bema." She was a good man. In other words, not for my mom. But to her, to say little things like that, I recall. She wouldn't say much, but really meaningful. But I remember as a kid too. There was a time there was about 15 of us at the old people's place. See, a lot of my cousins, or my aunties and their husbands, my uncles, they'd come in, they'd build the place, and then they'd move on. You know, some would go to the city, small town, and work, and then they'd come back. Well, when they came back, it was such a good time to see everyone. And even then, it was like we were brothers and sisters. There was no, even that word cousin, we didn't relate too much. Uh, we just treat each other like we're brothers and sisters. Sometimes there was, oh man, there was so many of us. But it was wonderful, the relationship we had. And it's funny how my mom always had her favorite of my cousins. My auntie had her favorite of us. That's how it went. Not saying that mom didn't like her own kids. I'm saying, you know, my aunties, they had their favorites among us too, among all the kids. Not that he disliked the others, but you could tell. But the relationship then, all I got to say is, I felt like I grew up like a little man. Same with the others. We were never treated like babies. They were open with us with everything, the way we lived. They knew our abilities, what we could carry, what we couldn't, what we could do, what we couldn't do. But I remember they used to break us into on like going for water, things like that. When we had a camp, they'd tell us, take this bucket, go get some water. So I remember the first time I went, I got to the edge of the stream. It wasn't running swift. So I tried to reach down with it. I was too short. And I thought about it, and then I saw a little path. So I went down that little path. I walked right in the water, filled the bucket, brought it back. They sent me back because when I dipped the water, I muddied it, and I stepped in, and I couldn't reach it. So they sent my cousin, Dennis. So he went down. He's a little bit bigger than me. So he reached down with the pail. We had to either that or just go down the trail. The horses went down that trail. So he reached down, got a pail. He got back. Not enough. It wasn't even half a pail. So I went back with him. And he walked down real slow. Didn't murky up the water. And slowly we got a pail of water. Came back. We're just little guys. But I know what they're doing. They're breaking us in. At the time, we didn't realize that, but I don't know. They're making us do things. And they laughed a lot. They laughed at us a lot. We didn't feel bad about it. You know, like, come back with that much of a pail of water. Thinking you did something.
Yeah, I think that's something that I know has always stayed with you, the importance of drinking clean water and getting the purest water, you know, that you have access to. And for me, the cleanest water I've ever drank is every time that I come to visit you, because you'll take me wherever, you know, you're getting your water. But even when I remember when we lived in Pascua, and there was no fresh, you know, water there, like no spring, you know, for you to get the water. And I remember in the winter, you would take all these buckets and scoop up a bunch of clean snow when it was like fresh fallen. And with that would be our water. And
Yeah,
sometimes, you would boil it or whatever, but that was our water. And I know that's something that's always stayed with you. And, hearing these stories just helps me understand why, that was a way of life. And that
yeah,
was important for you to nourish yourself in that,
yeah,
pure form. So,
yeah. We just did that here the other day. There's a little place comes out of the mountain water stream. Do it here. Got the one back home I showed you at Rimby. There's
yeah.
one near Banff. Oh, they're all over the place. But I always look for good clean water. But getting back to all of it, where where the towns. Now this is the hardest thing. This is the hardest thing for me when I recall what happened. So we had to move to this other town. It was called Breton. It was only 15 miles away, if that, from the first town. And we got a house that it wasn't much, but it was clean. And again, the store food wasn't really acceptable. A lot of it wasn't. I think mostly got vegetables, potatoes, turnips, things like that. But out in the bush now, there was a bush near the town. Now this is something I'll tell you. So Mom said we're going to go and trap some rabbits. Well, bush shook. So me and Bob again, we went with her and Dorothy, sister Dorothy. So we got into the bush and we saw the rabbit trail. We set snares and came back. And it's funny how the town people, they were watching us. There's some of them would even stand outside at their doors and watch us what we're doing. Because we were the only Indian family in the town. There was some way the other side of, outside of town. They lived, Joe Shot, they were from where the old people lived. We just visit once in a while. But I remember when we went out, we got, I don't know how many rabbits, a lot of rabbits. I think all the snares were full. Must have got 10 or so. So we're coming in with the rabbits. And Mom had most of them. And we're dragging the others in the snow again. And all the people in town came out and they were saying things. I recall one guy yelled out, and he said, those rabbits are dirty, just like them. That's what he said about us. And my mom didn't say nothing. He just kept walking. And they were saying other things that I don't recall, but I remember that in particular. That was the first guy. He looked right at us. He's talking to a guy beside him. But that's what we had to put up with daily in that town. And I remember when Mom went to the store, there wasn't much. She always used to get potatoes, I recall, and turnips. And periodically we'd get beef. We didn't really like beef because we grew up on moose meat, stuff like that. Never beef. Periodically, I think someone would kill a cow, but a steer. But it was usually to feed visitors or give away. You'd give away meat to other people. They used to come in the camps. I recall that when nobody could hunt. But in that town, it was so bad. We weren't allowed. Us kids weren't allowed in that store. We would never go alone. We'd go with our mom, but we were not allowed in there. Like they didn't trust us. Even at that point, I mean, I didn't want to steal anything. We didn't like any of the food from there anyway. So as for stealing, it never even entered my head. But we weren't allowed in that store. And the same with the other store. It was kind of a hardware general store. But the grocery store itself, strictly no kids in here. I'm sorry. us kids. You see other white kids going there, but not us. So we knew then that there's something wrong with these people. And Mom would never talk about it, other than she'd warn us. And she'd tell us, you don't go near, she'd tell us which house, stay away from there. She said, they're really bad. They're bad people. She let us know. So she must have figured that town out and who's in it pretty quickly. But that's how bad it was. It was at that point, I wanted so bad to go and live with the old people. I wanted so bad to go live back in the bush, to go back there, just to feel what I felt then, because I wasn't feeling good. And my sister Dorothy and I we wouldn't talk. We're just kids, but we'd always say that we want to go back to the old people, go back where we experienced all that beauty. And Mom was changing too. She was getting angrier, not at us, but always at the outside world. She was getting angrier. And me and Dorothy talked about it again a little bit. She said, Dorothy said, Mom said they might come for us. I said, who? Who's coming for us? The old people? She said, no, strangers. And I couldn't figure it out. And she said it a couple times. She said, there's people that are going to come here and they might take us away. That's what I had in my mind while we're in that town. And I remember Mom was saying one time, she said, go out. Did you take these kids out? My younger brother, late Don, and Yvonne. She said, go for a run. She used to watch it. We'd have fun, she'd watch us in the yard running. I'd grab them by our hands and we'd each run on our own. I read a book. I'm sorry, I read something that was passed on to me from an old Dakota. He says very much the same thing. I couldn't believe it when I read it. His Kunshi, his grandma used to tell him, first thing you do in the morning when you put your shoes on is get ready to run. So he grew up in the 30s as a child. So it wasn't long after that it did happen. When it did happen, I was out in the yard. I remember Don, he was outside of the yard. There was a small fence. And Yvonne was in the house with Mom. And I looked up and here's a police car pulling in. So there's one way and then there's another way over here. There's a road coming right by the house. So right away, Mom come out and she's pushing Yvonne. She said, get going. She said, get going now. So I grabbed Donnie's hand and Yvonne's hand. And I started running. The cop car was over there and they're already coming this way. And I thought, we got it made. We got this other way to go through. So we started. A cop car, another one, pulled right in. We were cornered. The house was here. They were there, both sides. And I didn't know what to do. So I went back towards Mom. And a cop came up, grabbed Yvonne, grabbed Don, put him in a car. And I just stood back and then he come over and he's going to grab me. I jumped away from him. And the cop I didn't see the other one. He come back, he just grabbed me around the waist. He lifted me up, opened that car door, strode in, threw me in the back. Of course, those doors are locked. You can't get out. So we're there and we're up watching. Because Mom's standing at the door and there's two of those young cops. They're trying to restrain her, hold her back, because she's heading towards us. And I recall this, and I laughed years later about it. At the time, it hurt. But I tell you how strong Mom was. So the two young cops got her, the RCMP. She took one, and she threw him just like a baby, just threw him. He went rolling on the ground. And the other guy, she grabbed him by the shirt, she threw him down, and she come at the car. She was coming to get us.
Yeah.
And we're watching. We're just happy. A cop come over and tricked her, grabbed her and held her down. The other cops, they jumped in the car and took off with us. We didn't know where we're going. We didn't know. We're all just, it was hard, especially Yvonne just crying
Yeah.
so hard. That was tough. That
Yeah.
was tough.
Yeah, that
It was the first time. Go ahead.
that I was gonna say that really ties into the earlier memory of her strength, you know, not just her physical strength, because I mean you saw that and how she fought off those officers, but just her fierce need to protect you guys and prepare you in all those ways. And I know that in the next recording, next episode, you know, we're gonna really talk more about, you know, that day that you guys were taken and all of that. We're kind of running out of time for this session, Dad. But if you have anything else you want to say to wrap up this session, and then, you know, next week we'll talk more about, you know, when you guys were taken and the places you went and things like that.
Yeah. All right. But I guess to round it off, see where the hardest thing is this. The sudden shift in my mind, and I recall it even as a child, even then, there was a sudden shift in my mind. And you might say it was, I don't know how to describe it, but more a feeling. It's almost like I hated those police. I hated them. I really hated them.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, and even then I thought if I was bigger, I'd be just like Mom. I'd go after them. I'd stop them from taking us away.
Yeah.
That's how I thought. And I don't know if I should say hatred, it's just disgust for them. It's like they weren't like us. Moniao means moniao. They're not complete. Monio, they're not four. That's where nihao comes from. Four, nio. So they're not complete. It's like moniao. It's not derogatory. It's the truth. They're not like us. Because you know, as a child, and I recall, if they were like us, they wouldn't do this to us. They wouldn't be doing this to my mom.
Yeah.
You know, the kind of things that went through. But yeah, it was rough. It was very hard, especially inside here. It was very hard. That was the hardest thing of this whole. And we'll talk about it again.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can handle it now because I feel like I always wanted to. I feel like I've achieved it, and that is getting even. I survived, and others did.
Yes.
You know, barely, but I survived.
Mm.
You know, and it's not just a survivor. I feel I've come out of it. In some respects, saying that they somewhat as mean and as twisted as they were, they helped me. They helped me to be stronger, to survive their mentality, their abuse, their physical abuse, all of it. But we'll get into that.
Yeah.
And believe me, I won't snivel about it. Those days are over.
Well, I really appreciate you talking about your youth and the things you experienced. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions is that Native people were before, you know, we just were. And whether it be, you know, I know it varies from nation to nation, and I know we're not infallible founts of all things Indigenous, but, you know, I know for Cree people, for our people, I understand our life ways, and it's really beautiful to hear from another person the way my dad spoke of things, you know. So I thank you for that, because it reaffirms that, you know, we are human, you know. We did what we had, and we had what we had, and that we treated, like, even the thing with children, you know, we treated children like they were people, you
Yeah.
know? And then the adults, the childlike ways, like I love that. I love being with my elders that laugh, and we have this, despite what's happened, we still carry the joy of the before times. And
Yeah.
I love that very much. So
Yeah. Yeah. Keeps me alive.
yeah, samesies. You know, I just wanted to let people know that are listening right now that we will be doing, this is a multi-part series. I believe I mentioned that in the intro, but the thing is our stories don't have an expiration date, and they don't have just a rhythm and flow to it. You know, like that's one of the things about us is we can relate stories of our youth to our adulthood and back and forth very, very fluidly, because that's the way life is. It's not linear. Our experiences aren't just linear. You know, they're all related.
True.
Everything's related to another experience or an experience with another person. So that's why we
Yes,
want to
it is.
offer all this space to you, Lester, to make sure that you're able to tell a story, because hopefully in our time together, it inspires other people to tell theirs. It opens the eyes for people that didn't have the understanding that maybe they needed to have more compassion. And there's a lot of room for growth with this. So when we reconvene next week, you know, we'll talk about some of the harder stuff, and you know, and go from there, because again, we don't have an expiry date.
I want to thank you for this, because it really helps for me. It's good to talk about it. I don't feel any remorse or anything like that. I don't, like I said, I'm not sniveling about it. A lot of people are hurting bad, Indian people, for what they've experienced. A lot of it's coming out now. And some of them stories are similar. But I find out when I talk to a lot of people, a lot of these stories are unique, because we're all individuals and we all experienced things differently, perhaps, or we have a different perspective. But one thing we have in common is that we were stolen and we're mistreated. That's the bottom line.
Well, you say with like speaking it is important, and that's the thing with, like, I think and maybe I'm biased, you know, I think every native language is beautiful, but I think with Plains Cree, with our language, like Gakichiari Win, it's literally meaning, you know, the act of healing or consoling through words, right? Like, and that's it. At the end of the day, they can take everything from us. People can take everything from us, but the thing they can't take are our words. And
That's
so,
it. That's it. Yeah.